Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Happy Market Update Monday. My name is Nash Paradise, also known as the Lone Wizard. It's just going to be me today. We're going to hit this hard and quick as we are all suffering from the Fed hangover last week. Let's talk a little bit about last week's news and how we got here. So, big stuff last week was the Fed meeting. We knew the Fed was going to drop rates. The Fed dropped rates. To the surprise of a bunch of large corporations, people on the internet, your neighbor's cousin's, realtor who is posting about interest rates are down, Fed dropped rates. Yeah, no, not really. The Fed dropped the Fed funds rate, and we hit that 4.25 from the 4.5 that we were at. Knew it was coming. It was a little overdue, and it happened. Okay, cool. Now what? We had more big news last week, too. Thursday was actually a pretty important day with the jobs reports. Jobs reports have been a huge focus of the Fed and of overall economic outlooks lately. We had jobless claims and continued claims, and those both came in a little soft. We had been seeing, the recent jobs reports showing a slowing of growth, showing fewer jobs being added to the economy, which will normally translate into more jobless claims. So like the previous jobless claims figures around 264,000 new claims. We expected that to go down a little bit. 240,000 was the mark. We came at 231. So fewer jobless claims than expected. Continued claims, they're still high at 1920, a little lower than the forecast of 1950 though. So not great for what we need on the interest rate side. Good for the economy, but what's bad for jobs, what's bad for inflation is usually good for interest rates, because as the economy slows, things need to get cheaper in order to ramp it back up. So that was last week. Let's talk about this week. This week has a lot of stuff on here, but honestly, we're going to call it a kind of dead week. We've got a deluge of Fed speakers this week. We've got, Williams, Hammack, Barkin, Marin, a lot of speeches today. And honestly, these speeches today could move the needle a little bit. The main reason, primary driver for mortgage rates increasing last week after the Fed decision is directly tied to the comments that Powell made in his press conference. So what he said was the dot plot does not necessarily indicate policy. Everyone got excited after the Fed announcement. Everyone got excited to know that the dot plot was looking really favorable for a lot of drops here in the next, through the end of the year and through most of next year. And we saw some surging in the bond market, which was awesome. And then it was gone almost immediately. We got a reversal, which is funny because the dot plot may not be policy, but it tells you where the Fed is thinking, where the Open Markets Committee expects things to go, which is going to be based on economic data. So it should be going in a good direction. So this week, we're going to be listening to the speeches. As we get to the end of the week, usually the core PCE numbers are really big for the Fed. And, that's Friday. So if you're circling a day here, circle Friday. I'm a little concerned that the forecast for core PCE month over month, and this is an inflation index, personal consumption, expenditures, it's set to drop on the month over month. So hopefully rounding helps us out. I wouldn't be surprised if we miss on that from the 0.3% previous 0.2% forecast. It would be very, very easy for that to come in at like 0.26, 0.25 and have a rounding up. The year over year could help us because that's still forecasted at 2.9%, but we'll see what happens. Everyone is really looking to next week's jobs report. That's the one that should move the needle a little bit further. Let's talk about the Fed, talk about what happened, talk about where things are going in the Fed funds rate. So we can finally stop looking at the September projection because we know, hey, September we dropped. Cool. Next Fed meeting, 10/29. 89% chance of another drop. We should get back-to-back drops here. The chances of getting 3 drops in a row with the 12/10 meeting coming in, 73.5%. I like it. If we finish the year with 3 drops in a row, that's going to be interesting as it relates to housing and interest rates. We saw 3 late drops last year, and we saw increases in the rate pretty much every time. And in fact, the beginning of 2025 was not good for pricing after those 3 rate drops. But different world, different economic situation, different political situation, different tariff situations. There's a whole lot going on with econ data that's going to impact that directly. So we don't know. We're going to be watching and seeing what happens there. But looking at 3 rate drops for the end of the year, as we get into next year, now we've got a much deeper chart here because of the updated dot plot. The FOMC is projecting, by the end of 2027, which is completely irrelevant at this point, being in that 275 to 300 range. So they're really putting a long-term projection on the Fed funds rate around 3%, which means we only have about another 1.25% to go. We could very well be at those levels by second quarter next year. So interesting in that we don't expect things to keep dropping over and over and over again. We've got 3-4 more rate drops left, 5 more rate drops before we hit their target goal. And then from there, who knows? But let's talk about what is that doing to us here in the mortgage market, here in real estate. Don't like to come back and see this tick up. We've talked about it a lot. Every time the Fed meets, we've talked about, hey, well, when the Fed does drop rates, a lot of times mortgage rates respond higher. And I'll say the same thing I've said a lot on these MMUs. Mortgage rates move in anticipation of what we know is coming, not in reaction to what happens. So they move with the bond market. They move with the econ data that's coming that is going to directly impact where the Fed funds rate moves. And because of that, the Fed drops are already priced in. Everything's already priced in. We get updated econ data on a Thursday. Bond market starts trading immediately. Mortgage-backed securities move instantly. That's not something that is going to take time. It's the same econ data that impacts the Fed is going to impact mortgage rates. So the fact that things are going down, the future forecasts are down, it's good for us, but what we should not expect are any kind of major moves. In fact, we're still probably going to be sitting in this Fed hangover for a while, depending on what the different members of the Fed say today, especially, and over the next week and a half as we get the jobs reports. This could look completely different going forward. So takeaways, interest rates are going down, not necessarily mortgage rates. Those have gone up a little bit. They're still really, really low compared to where we have been. Trying to push through and get through these floors. That 4.0% on the 10-year Treasury yield is critical right now, and we're at 4.14. We've gone the wrong direction. So interest rates have gone up, from that low of, I think, 6.21, 6.22, something like that, to about a 6.35. But honestly, if you talked to me or anyone months ago, having a 6.35 at this point would feel like a gift. So I would encourage anyone paying attention to this, especially mortgage lenders, real estate agents. These are the rates that we wanted. Yeah, they're up a bit from where we have been, but there's not necessarily anything that we're expecting that's going to come in that's just going to drop it instantly. Jobs data could, but the projections on the jobs data are not set up for us to win. They're set up for us to be a little flat. So, lock it if you like it. Use this information to have these conversations with consumers. The last thing we want is for a consumer to think, well, the Fed's going to drop the rate a few more times, so I'm going to hold off on the sidelines. Next thing you know, they're looking at, these mid-6 rates or even slightly higher through the end of the year and missing out on a great opportunity. So go out there, share the good word, make sure everyone is informed, and have an awesome Monday. Take care.